door when your friends come to call. There's not that much to it, no real work at all.
Bonnie Prince Billy has made a country album full of fiddles, mandolins, pedal steel guitars, and the kind of songs only he can write. Although in true Nashville style, he did collaborate with cats like John Anderson, Tommy Prine, and Tim O'Brien. And as we're about to hear, the album is doing quite well.
Let go my ego and embrace my ear. That's how we make it our home.
I mean, the feedback is really sort of stronger, maybe for this record than any other record that I've put out, frankly, which is great. I mean, there's a little bit of bittersweetness to it, because if this were 15 or 20 years ago, when that meant that people were buying the record, that would be different. As it is, it's wonderful to have been a part of making this record, and it felt so good to be a part of making it, and it felt so good to hear it and to know that it is finding, this kind of resonance with folks. That's really pretty darn marvelous.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, but you can't eat streaming numbers, can you?
It's not very fattening or tasty, no.
Okay, well, hopefully you can, if you don't mind, we just talk a bit about how it all came together. You and David Ferguson have been buddies for a while. You worked together way back when with Johnny Cash and whatever, and have been friends. But when did he come to you about this? Did you come to him? How did the process begin?
We met in the early 2000s when I went to attend a recording session that Johnny Cash was doing for the American 3 record, and ended up singing with him on a song that I wrote, which was great. And Ferg was there as the engineer, and that was great. And then we reconnected maybe a couple years later, and have just sort of stayed in touch and stayed friends since then, and worked on a bunch of records and little recording projects and just friendly stuff. Ferg came up and played a little music at our wedding about 8 or 9 years ago. Yeah, 8 or 9, probably 9 years ago. And we're just close. But we spent a lot of time observing and talking about music together, and how it's made, and how it should be made, and how it shouldn't be made. And maybe a year and a half ago, I think I gave him a call, because I hadn't seen him in person in a year or two. And I said, Ferg, I want to come see you. And he said, okay, well, I'll set up a songwriting session for us if you come down.
Right.
It's like, I'll set up a couple. And I said, okay. And that was just how the record started. It really was just born out of the friendship. I just wanted to hang out with him. And he suggested that. I don't know why he suggested it. He'd never suggested it before. I'd never.
And it's not usually the way you work, is it?
It's not. I like it very much. It was great. But I guess part of it is I'm an independent artist, and I've always been an independent artist. And I think those songwriting sessions are designed around folks who work within the confines, we'll say, of the industry, right? Major label industry. So it's not necessarily a game that had ever been invited to play before. And at the same time, the rules, of course, are all upended in every field right now, or most fields that I have awareness of. Yeah. And so he said for some reason he thought it might be a good idea. He knows a bunch of brilliant and successful songwriters, and thought maybe that I had matured enough that he could introduce me into their company without embarrassment.
Oh, that's nice of him.
It was. I mean, it's more than nice. It really is. I mean, it's one of Ferg's work on this record is one of the most interesting and generous, sustained efforts that I can recall in my working life. Because what he was able and willing to share with me is really extraordinary.
Cool. So tell me how the songwriting sessions work with you not being, a veteran of such a thing. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, if Tonight with the Dogs I'm Sleeping is probably one of those songs.
Sitting at the bar with a drink or two, telephone rings and it's you know who is gonna get his ass chewed tonight. Never like sleeping out in the stairs is too damn hard. Besides, I don't think I can make it that far. I'm sleeping with the dogs tonight.
We started with Ronnie Bowman, who's a sort of a bluegrass or bluegrass adjacent singer, picker, amazing, brilliant music maker. He came over for a morning appointment at like 10 in the morning. And so it was me and Ferg and Ronnie sitting around the table in the kitchen. And Ronnie had the first ideas for what ended up being the first song on the record, the Turn to Dust song. And, so we did our requisite time, which is, I can't even remember now if it's 2 hours or 3 hours. It might be 2 hours. We finished the song. We were having a good time. Vibe was good. The next one was going to be Tommy Prine, John Prine's son. And John and Ferg were old friends, and they co-owned a studio in Nashville that's now it doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down. So Ferg suggested Tommy, who's just starting his music career officially, like his first record came out about a year ago, I think. And Tommy came over, and Ronnie just said, mind if I stick around for this one? And we were like, sure. So it's just, and then it's such a cool thing to witness. It's almost like, it's like the song is Claude Rains in the Invisible Man or something, and each of us are taking turns applying a little bit of makeup or a little bit of clothing, and like the song is just waiting there between the four of us, and we reveal it by throwing our ideas out and seeing what sticks. It feels very casual, and yet that's what you expect of our greatest anything. Our greatest artists, our greatest practitioners of anything is to watch them work and think, well, that looks easy.
Yeah, right. And so are you literally sitting around a table? Just
literally sitting around a kitchen table. Yeah, each of us have a something that records things, and a notebook and a guitar, and just sort of, it's a dance because people have ideas, and someone might have a bad idea, but like in improv comedy, it's not a good idea to say that's a stupid lyric, that's a bad chord change. Because you might be wrong. You wait and you say, what about this? And you just keep going around the table, being sure that you eliminate the things that are ultimately destructive to a good song, while trying to support the things. And I'm also starting to think like, I might end up, because at first we were just writing songs also. But then I'm thinking like, if I'm going to end up singing these songs, I want to be sure, there's certain things I want to push forward and certain things I want to back off on.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you just look at the clock and you look at the song, and the session is ending and the song is completed. How did that happen?
That's pretty cool.
I don't know. It's really cool.
Now, speaking of songs you want to talk about or not, Guns Are for Cowards is one that caught my ear, of course.
Who will you shoot in the face? Who will you shoot in the brain? Who will you shoot in the back and leave bleeding out in the rain? Who will you shoot in the leg? How many times in the neck? Shoot, and then how would you feel? Exalted or destroyed? Yeah, Guns Are for Cowards that was one after we'd done about 8 of the songwriting sessions. Ferg said, "You want to do more?" I said, "No, let's just go ahead and cut a record. I've got a few songs, and Guns Are for Cowards is one of those songs that I had made. I didn't know that if it could ever fit on any sort of record, and I just thought, you know what? At that point, I performed it for about 6 months, and I thought, well, I'm going to throw this in here and just see what happens, because at that point I felt like it was a strong song and a strange song, and I figured the pros would know how to handle it, and they did indeed. Yeah,
it's almost like a polka.
Well, it is absolutely a polka. That's what Ferg said because none of the musicians would have heard any of the songs prior to about 5 minutes before we start recording, basically. And Ferg heard me over in the corner. Before each song, I go in the corner with Mike Rojas, who's the piano, organ, and keyboard player.
Yep.
And I would play it for him, and he would write down the changes, put it in a copy machine, and hand it to everybody. So Ferg could hear me singing the song to Mike Rojas, and he's like, Willie, come over here. He's like, Willie, I think there's only really one way we can do this song. That would be as a polka. And I was like, okay, sounds good to me. At first I was like, I thought he was sabotaging the song when he said
Right.
that. And I was like, okay, this is the first bad decision of the session. And then I realized it took me about a second and a half before I remembered that we were working in the house of the late great Cowboy Jack Clement, who had
Oh
been
yeah.
for hero and mentor and employer and friend. And he'd been gone about 10 years, and his cousin Bob Clement had taken over the place and lived there with his family, and had brought the studio not only back up to snuff, but a little bit nicer than Ferg remembered it ever actually being. And Cowboy was a huge fan of the polka.
Okay.
He loved it. He loved to dance to it. He loved to witness it. So after about a second and a half of my, disappointment, shock, and horror that Ferg had suggested it, I thought, wait a minute, this is Ferg channeling his friend, hero, mentor,
Yeah.
lawyer. And I thought, okay, yeah, in fact, rather than being an insult to the song, I was like, you just kind of bestowed one of the highest honors you could think to bestow.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, so I'm familiar with the polka.
Yeah.
But did you had any pushback about the content, the lyrical content of that song?
Not any, the closest thing was, before we recorded it, I believe we were down in the southwestern United States, maybe in Arizona, and I was playing the song on stage, and my friend Oscar, who sells merch, was in the back of the room next to the armed security guard at the theater where we were playing.
Right.
And the armed security guard began to demonstrate evident discomfort.
Right.
But as one might hope, with a song like this, he and Oscar started talking. Oscar started asking him about his discomfort, and they started talking. And ultimately, he gave Oscar his business card, and they had a productive and friendly conversation. So
it's nice that can happen.
That's the goal. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, the song is not trying to. I mean, there is definitely a judgment call in the last verse, but I feel as if the judgment call is backed up, and it's not meant to be, just a shallow finger thing, but an attempt to, potentially shame people into realizing that there is maybe an overuse and an over allowance of gun freedom in the United States.
Now you mentioned Mike Rojas. Is that him playing the piano in London May?
Absolutely. Yes.
Cool. Very dramatic.
Leave it to solitude all alone. Only the lonely can be so strong. Never has anyone made such a fuss. Death looks in the window as only death must. Or you will find that with thoughtful action you will rise, never to suffer.
As Ferg says, sometimes I think Mike is too good. And he is. He's awesome. Yeah. But that's what mixing is all about. When he's too good, we have the faders.
Yeah, that's true. And you made a video that's kind of interesting to go along with it.
Yeah.
What's going on there? Breakdancing and roping a car? Or, I don't know.
Yeah, it was made with a guy named Cy Selvarajan. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but we've done 3 or 4 videos with him. He's based out of Dallas, Texas. I met him when we did this blind date party series of singles in the lockdown year with Bill Callahan. And Cy made a great video for nothing, and we had a great relationship. And the song has built into it a lot of personal story, including, my co-star in the video is the gentleman London May, after whom the song was named.
Oh.
And I told Cy, I said, I want to make a video. What do you got? I said, well, I've got this song London May, and it's, can we put London May in the video? And he said, yeah. And he just that's how he did it. Yeah.
Cool. Now I don't know if we have much more time to talk or not, but I just want to touch on "Is My Living in Vain," which is the one cover on the album.
Am I wasting my time? Can the clock be rewind? Have I let my light shine? Have I made 99? No, no, of course not.
Is my living in vain? Yeah. So, I mean, many years ago, I had a friend who's a brilliant guitar player, named Mark Hamilton here in Louisville. He came over to track something on a song I was working on, and asked him what he was up to. He said he was playing in a church house band at one of the leading sort of black mega churches in Louisville. And he said the music was really strong. So I went down to hear him play. And that day, they played a song by James Hall, Worship and Praise, I think is the name of the ensemble, based on the scripture, be thou not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And it really struck me. And I think in part it struck me because, one of the earliest lyrics I remember memorizing as a child was the Lou Reed's Perfect Day when I was probably 9 or 10 years old. He says, "You're going to reap just what you sow." But it had me looking up the scripture, and then I found another song by Matty Moss Clark, based on the same scripture, and it was so good that I started to dive into Matty Moss Clark and the music of her and her daughters, the Clark sisters,
The Clarks, yeah.
and became sort of compelled and obsessed by how they put their things that concern them to music. And when I get that kind of fascinated and compelled and obsessed by something, I'll want to cover something because that's a way of getting into the inner workings but their songs are, it's a unique hybrid of kind of funk and prog and gospel that they do. And some of the even just chord structures are chords that I'm not fluent with. So after listening to a lot, that was a song I thought, well, I can, kind of dumb this down for myself enough to attempt to explore it and hopefully thereby get a little bit closer to the Clark sisters and their mom.
Yeah. Now I'm impressed that you were listening to Lou Reed when you were 9. Perfect Day.
It was because my older brother, who was only 2 years older, but he started early. He was in
Good on him.
band by age 13, playing original, weird art punk by the time he was 13 with older kids. And so he brought a lot of very interesting music into our house. And that was, and early on I was transitioning out of listening to things like the Everly Brothers and Bing Crosby and Elvis Presley. And so he would, things like The Fall, Minor Threat, and various Glenn Danzig projects and Lou Reed. Those were Ramones were a big one. Yeah.
It's interesting when you're that age, when you're like preteens, adolescent, how quickly you transition from one thing to another, seemingly very desperate kind of musical styles, but it all makes sense to you, right?
Yeah, it all makes sense. I was making mixtapes for my, for the girls at school, and I would put Everly Brothers' Bird Dog right next to An Older Lover, etc. by The Fall. And to me, I was just like, yeah, this sounds like good, and I'm whatever, 13 or 14 by that age. But yeah, it just sounds normal.
Nice. Now, getting back to this record, I'm interested in your vocals throughout the record, and were you approaching them, recording them, thinking about them differently than you have in the past?
Part of the glorious magic of this record and making a record in Nashville with session folks, and this is the second time I've really done it. The first time was in maybe 2004 with Greatest Palace Music that Mark Nevers put together, the un-A-list session group that included the same fiddle player, Stuart Duncan, who's on this one too. But I mean, I've always liked to, as much as possible, which is most of the time, record the voice live, initially, and just keep that take. And in these sessions, that's what we did. And Ferg said, he said, "Willie, just you sing, and they're all going to be following. You're basically going to conduct with your voice." And it took me, maybe the first hour of the 2 days of tracking to kind of understand what he meant and to really, hold that steering wheel with something resembling authority. But it's true. I mean, if you're well, I think about singing all the time. I think about singing all the time, and how my body does it, how a brain does it, how other people do it. So it's you just it just happens. It's insane. Like, and I noticed it in Nashville 20 years ago when I did the session. I was like, who is this singer? Where
Right.
does this singer come from? And it because they allow you to make choices that you can kind of only dream about with certain other musicians because they're so tuned in, they're so responsive, and it's so like it's do or die right then. They press record and they're like, okay, we're gonna do this.
Right.
We're about to make a recording, and it has to be as great as we can possibly make it. And in order to do that, we have to support the singer.
Right.
And that's what you're in there experiencing. And I mean, there's just nothing like it. It's like one of the greatest joys that a singer can experience, or a singer that with interests like mine, I guess, can possibly
Right.
experience.
And
It's just sing it, It's like I listen to him like, where is that singer now? Where
right.
is he today? He was in that room with those. Where is he now? Because I like my singing and I continue to work on it, but how do I get that? And the
Yeah.
only way to get it is through the collaborative energies that everyone brings their share to the table.
That's very exciting to hear. I mean,
Yeah.
and it kind of explains why some records work so great because of the situation that they were recorded and others don't. You
No,
know.
it's absolutely. I mean, you can begin to, with some degree of success, reverse engineer records that you listen to and think, oh, I know what was an overdub and what wasn't an overdub, and whether it's a vocal or another part as well. And because you've witnessed it,
Yeah.
and sometimes it really works for things to be assembled separately, and sometimes it just doesn't. You think like, oh, this would be a great record if they'd had the courage and ability to do it together, actually.
Right. Yes. Have you ever reconsidered or just rethought how you might have redone something in the past? I mean, you have a huge back catalog, so there's got
Every recording scenario and live scenario has its own share of lessons to
yeah.
to walk away with.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty much, another interesting thing about this record is that, almost all the time when I'm setting up a recording session, I'm setting it up with people whom I love, respect, admire, know potentially intimately.
Yeah.
And this was, I'm walking into a room of relative strangers, if not complete strangers. I'd done a couple sessions with Mike Rojas. I had met Russ Paul at a barbecue at Ferg's once, and probably had about a 5-minute conversation with him. But these aren't people who I could call. I didn't
Yeah.
have their phone numbers or anything. So it's just everything is happening right there.
Yeah.
But usually the strengths of the other records is how you're navigating a relationship with somebody. So it's fascinating to be able to put yourself into these kind of fantastic hypothetical relationships with somebody whose work you may know, or whose heart you may know, and see like, well, what happens when we're in the same room trying to make music together.
Yeah. And are you thinking of the next project?
Oh yeah, I'm in the middle of it right now, actually.
Oh.
Because I had been working every day on the songs for a record, and when I went down to visit Ferg, and he
Yeah.
suggested song, so I had to put it on pause, and now I'm not only back into it, but now we're into the recording, and if I were to guess, I would say we're maybe about a fifth of the way into the experience, partly just because I'm trying to let it happen gently and organically, and that means everybody's schedules are crazy. Like we recorded on Saturday for like 5 hours, and the next session is when is the next session? It's not until next Wednesday.
Are you recording again in Nashville?
Oh, we're doing it in Louisville. I mean,
Louisville.
yeah, I mean, although I've talked to Fer, I was like, "You want to do this again?" I
Yeah.
called him about a month ago. I said, I've got to finish this record that I had started a year and a half ago. But you want to do this again?" He's like, "Yeah, I'd love to do it again." So, but I like to record in Louisville. Just I think
Sure.
it's where I come from, and it's I think it's worth showing people that if you just focusing on what you know is where you're going to find the most opportunities for, communicating something that's rich,
Right.
and complex. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like the creative process is going strong still. Has age entered into it? Is it better, easier, harder, different?
Oh, it's better, and I think it's better. It's, really, really, it's better in every way except for the fact that I did fantasize that I would be paid for my labor.
What were you thinking?
I know. And it's like, yeah, I had imagined, that if I worked really, really, really hard, that, eventually I could work a little bit less, or work on my own schedule, because there would be like a stream of royalties coming in. And there is
Yeah.
a little bit, but not like,
It's not right.
like it was potentially going.
Yeah.
And live is great, but it takes me away from the family, and it's hard. That's hard on the body, I guess.
Yeah.
Constant travel.
But at least that guy who owns Spotify is doing all right. So there's something.
He's at least able to take all the tens and hundreds of millions that should be going to music creators, and investing it into things like defense AI.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Give
Yeah.
that to confidence. Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully you make it down to this part of the world again sometime soon. I'm sure we'd love to have you.
I would love to. Yeah. I mean, I have often cited, and I will probably continue to for the rest of my life. The tour that we did 19 years ago in 2006 remains one of the most personally and musically satisfying tours of my life, as well as, I think the first big tour I did of New Zealand was in like 97 or something like that.
Right.
We started in Dunedin with the Renderers as the band, and yeah, it was amazing.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 13th Floor's Music Talk series, please be sure to subscribe to the website or to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and wherever you find your podcasts. There's a whole lot more to discover.